this evening discussion, William Jefferson Clinton, the 42nd, if I'm right, President of the United States, but also, of course, UN Special Envoy to Haiti. I mention it because we will discuss Haiti certainly during this discussion hour. Thank you, Will, for being able to join us again here in Davos. It has become a kind of tradition. You came first 2009 as President of the United States. And I would say it's nearly not to, we cannot believe that it's just around 10 years ago that you left office. And I would say you have given a new significance to the word retirement. If I look at your, if I look what you have done in between, of course you have created the Clinton Foundation, and we all are very familiar with the Clinton Global Initiative, which you set up in 2005, and we are very pleased to share in some ways the same objective and to cooperate, the mission always being what can we do together in order to improve the state of the world. I just would like to mention the 4 areas you are particularly involved in the Clinton Global Initiative at this moment, because you changed the focus, but it's empowering women and girls, strengthening market-based solutions, enhancing access to modern technology, and harnessing human potential. One area where the Clinton Global Initiative and the World Economic Forum have been able to work together is the situation in Haiti. And I would draw your attention to a publication which we just published this week with your help and with your support. It's called Private Sector Development in Haiti, Opportunities for Investment, Job Creation and Growth. So we took deliberately a very positive approach to Haiti, and we will hear afterwards how you feel about it. And I would like to thank here on behalf of both of us to all those members and partners who have been involved in this project, companies like Coca-Cola, McKinsey, TNT, Accenture, Microsoft, KPMG, Digital, and of course the international organizations such as the World Bank, the IFC, and the International Development Bank, IDB. I'm asking you, sir, for the first question. When you look at Haiti, where we stand today, are you satisfied with what has been achieved, and particularly do you believe that what has been achieved is sustainable for the future?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me again, and thank you for continuing to modify and grow the World Economic Forum and for making all of our facilities more comfortable this year. And thank you for the support you've given to the efforts in Haiti. So we'll begin with Haiti. Am I satisfied with the progress that has been made? No. Is it sustainable? Yes, if we emerge from the current political situation. And let me explain what I mean by that. In April of last year, about 3 months after the earthquake, after a lot of the emergency work had been done to try to save lives and put people in temporary shelter and make sure they had food and water and the basic things were taken care of, the government of Haiti, with its supporters, decided that we ought to have a mechanism that would enable the reconstruction to begin, to rebuild the economy, to deal with the housing and the other challenges on a longer-term basis, while the government itself built an agency that could supervise this for several years. So a very unique mechanism was set up called the Interim Haiti Reconstruction Commission, which is half international donors and participants. The Inter-American Development Bank, whose leader, Luis Moreno, has been just wonderful in Haiti. He's here today. The World Bank, the United Nations. I would clap for you too, my friend. The United Nations, all the countries that have pledged $100 million or more, Canada, France, the United States, Venezuela is there. Cuba has observer status because they've given a lot of things there. All the people who fight with each other in our hemisphere are united in trying to help Haiti, the Caribbean community, and then every sector of Haitian society is represented. And what we are attempting to do is what we did in Indonesia after the tsunami, to run all the public donations through there and also to get all the non-governmental organizations to get their projects approved, because this commission basically has a mandate to do the rebuilding in a way consistent with the economic plan and the social development plan adopted by the government of Haiti. Then we had to staff it up. Keep in mind, 17% of the government workforce was killed on Earthquake Day. And we had to create a whole new agency. So it took us till about August to really get going. We had a lot of help from Price Waterhouse, from McKinsey & Company, from others, and we're moving now. Many countries and the UN have given us staff people. The Haitian diaspora, many people have been willing to go home and work. And since then, an enormous amount of work has been done. And I think we've got a better strategy for how to get rid of all the earthquake rubble. We're going to have a housing expo, and I think this year you'll see a lot of movement out of those camps into housing. And so, yes, it is sustainable. Now, in the midst of all this, there has been an election for a new president and a parliament, and a dispute about the results of the presidential election, which the government of Haiti has tried to resolve with the help of the OAS and other interested parties. If we can have an election which is completed on time for both a new parliament and a new president, that is perceived by the government and by the people of Haiti to be an honest, transparent process that is empowering to them, and if this can all go forward between now and the time the new government is to start meeting in May, then I think it is sustainable. I have a very, very high regard for the man who is my co-chair in this commission, Jean-Max Bellerive, who was here, I think, last year. He's the Prime Minister of Haiti. They have emergency authority to act without legislative approval, and I hope that if we can get an understanding that we can make some changes in the laws and procedures of the country to make it more competitive. I think I just left an annual conference in Saudi Arabia, and I stopped off in Bahrain. Both those countries have done an astonishing job in the last few years of improving their competitiveness by measuring their progress against the World Bank's ranking and the World Economic Forum's rankings of competitive economies. And that's what I have urged the Haitians to do, to just keep pushing themselves up. That's a transparent process, and it's one you can keep score on. But yes, I think it is sustainable. No, I'm not satisfied. But a lot of good things have been done. Even in the aftermath of the cholera epidemic, Doctors Without Borders and others have helped us to establish clinics set up to deal with cholera, but they leave us the skeleton of now a national health system. And I could give, the private sector has committed more than well over $100 million in a country where 75% of the 9 million people live on less than $2 a day to development projects. We just cut the ribbon on the restoration of Haiti's old iron market. And I urge you to go online and find it. You can find it on our Haiti website, the IHRC website. You can also probably find it on Digicel's website, the cell phone company, because it was financed by Dennis O'Brien, the leader of Digicel. But they rebuilt an 1891 market that was really built in turn-of-century style, one of these beautiful old Beaux-Arts buildings, and it stands out like a breath of fresh air against the destruction of Haiti. It's one of the most beautiful buildings in the Caribbean, and now it's up and going again. So we're going to be fine if our supporters will stay with us and we can manage the politics during the rebuilding. We need your help.
So it was a good demonstration of public-private partnership. Now, if I would extend the area and build the Millennium Development Goals, and the deadline is 2015, you have been very much involved. You are involved with your practical work. You have been involved in the conceptual work. My question here would be similar. Are you satisfied, and are you particularly satisfied with the engagement of business in making those goals a reality?
I would say that the answer to the second question is I am very satisfied that there are more businesses more involved in trying to figure out practical, affordable, and sustainable ways to not only meet but to maintain the Millennium Development Goals than we could have predicted 10 years ago. That's the good news. I'm concerned about something else. I'm concerned that both businesses in this difficult environment and governments in this difficult environment will see the necessary investments in meeting these goals as somehow optional or one of those things that unfortunately need to be cut. And you and I were talking backstage about whether this will happen or not, and I think it depends upon how central businesses and political leaders throughout the world see the meeting of the Millennium Development Goals. If you run a global corporation and you believe in markets and you believe that they promote democratic freedoms as well as economic prosperity, you have to be concerned about the continuing inequality in the world, not only because it makes you feel bad, but because it imposes very severe constraints on future growth. You should be concerned about the pace of climate change because if you look at Australia alone, it imposes very severe constraints on future growth. So what we have to do, I think, is to integrate creating these kinds of measures like the Millennium Development Goals of shared progress into the basic business plan. These things are no longer what you might call economic externalities. They have to be part of the core vision of what it is to run a business in a global society and what it is to run a responsible government. I'm very worried, for example, in the United States now, in the aftermath of these congressional elections, the majority party in the House seems to believe that the most important public policy we can possibly have is to give me another tax cut, and that the best thing we can do is to pay for it by getting rid of all foreign assistance, as if that were not part of our, not only our moral responsibility, but our own economic and social well-being over the next unforeseeable period of time. So this is something we need to talk about. I hope in the forum here, I hope there will be thousands of conversations about this. Everybody understands if you can't afford to keep doing this for a year or two, but to abandon this as a core part of making the global economy work in the 21st century would be a terrible mistake.
I would formulate in the following way, as we did outside. Integrating external costs into the business model is not just a question of being socially oriented. it's a question long-term of competitivity and of survival. But let me shift to a more political issue. Bill, you were so close to reaching an agreement between Israel and Palestine. And now we see the events in Tunis, and probably matters will become much more complicated, much more dangerous. Would you like to share your ideas in this respect with us?
Well, first, I think we don't really know how the Tunisian process will play itself out. But it is a manifestation of the yearning for change and accountability and shared progress moving throughout the world, particularly throughout the Middle East and North Africa. But the street demonstrations in Cairo, I feel differently about what happened in Lebanon. I think Lebanon's so far, I hope I will be proved wrong, but it looks to me like a crass reaction, preemptive reaction to an international body doing an objective effort to determine who murdered Prime Minister Hariri. And so I feel differently about that. And I just want to make sure the Lebanese have some real dominant role in controlling their own destiny over the long run. But if I see what happened in Tunisia and relatively speaking, the smaller protests that you see in the streets in Cairo as a yearning in the Middle East and North Africa to be part of a modern world that works. And in that sense, to me, it is part and parcel of the modernization movement manifest in Saudi Arabia by building 4 new communities, the first coeducational university, which also does amazing surgeries and research, the Bahrain adopting an economic development mechanism that it's half private sector, half public sector, women fully represented, the UAE having NYU building a university there and winning the competition with Germany for the International Clean Energy Headquarters on the promise of building in the Middle East a city that is completely carbon neutral, the university in Qatar and the whipping they put on us in the World Cup thing and promising to build 10 or 12 air-conditioned soccer stadiums so you can play football in 110-degree temperature. All of this is a part of, and I'll tell you something, Dubai recently hosted a conference. I flew all the way to Dubai to speak to of the 22 countries in the Middle East and North Africa about the alarming rise in diabetes attendant to childhood obesity and Dubai and what could be done about it because of the project that we have in the United States. This is a huge deal, all these countries coming together and wanting to adopt common policies to restore health and a longer future to their countries. And so all of this is really exciting to me. What we have to do is to try to give the Tunisians a positive way forward. What we have to do is to try to give the Egyptians a way forward that connects the Egypt that I know with the Egypt that the left out and left behind live in. I recently spoke to the Cairo, the U.S. Egyptian Chamber of Commerce, and they had more than 1,500 people there. It was exhilarating, but the people you see in the street on television don't feel like they're a part of that. So there will be a lot of fits and starts, but on balance, if I were in Israel and I had any influence, I'd want to make that deal now because all these countries have offered Israel a political, economic, and security partnership. Not just peace, not just the normalization of relationships, but a genuine partnership. And they realize Israel will become the first country in the world to put 100,000 all-electric cars on the road. Not the U.S., not China, not countries much bigger, Israel. Can you imagine what the synergies of economic and social development that could be claimed if the Palestinians were given their state, and they've got the best partner in the West Bank they've ever had. So I think, to me, all these things that are going on should make a peace more likely. I realize there are all kinds of arguments against that, but just look at where we're going to be in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. Can anyone imagine that either the Middle East or, in particular, the Israelis and Palestinians will be better off if we do not do this now? It has to be worse, not better. So I hope, Klaus, as your question intimated, that what you see on television in the disruptions will animate the parties to make a peace agreement, but it ought to be done because of the positive future they can build together, not just out of fear.
I would like to have a dialogue with you, and I see someone sitting over there who has served David Corrigan. How many presidents? 5, 6 U.S. presidents?
Since Grover Cleveland, actually.
Yeah.
Now, David Gargan I thought he was going to always be known as my token Republican in the White House, but he was so promiscuous, turned out he'd work for any president. He's worked for he just wants to prove he can outlast us all.
Mr. President, it's good to see you again, sir. And thank you for coming back to Davos. I know I speak for a lot of folks here. It's really good to see you looking so fit.
Thank you.
It's really, really good. Two questions. One about leadership. We have many young global leaders here in Davos, coming from business, the civic sector, the public sector. What advice would you give them, what counsel about how they might be effective leaders in the 21st century? That's the first question. And the second question, as you well know, a debate has broken out again about whether America is in decline. And we have public intellectuals like Neil Ferguson and Gideon Rachman who are issuing dark threats about America's decline. And we have others like Joe Nye who are much more reassuring. And I'm curious where you are in that debate, what you think the implications are for America and for the world, especially in relationship to China. And finally, how does America get itself back on track, especially in the creation of jobs? I'm sorry that's very broad, but if Klaus also had some thoughts, I know people would welcome them too. Thank you again.
Well, first, to the young leaders, I would say the challenges you face depend on where you live and how global your activities are. But I think you should, whatever you do, you should focus on the interconnection of your activities to everything else that's going on in your country and your region and the world. And I believe that there are two things that I would like to see you focus on, one of which I talk about all the time like a broken record, and that is, don't just talk about the challenges we face, do something about them. Don't just say you wish the people in your government would do this, that, or the other thing, or you wish the people running the biggest companies in the world would do this, that, or the other thing. Figure out something you can do to change things in the direction you think they ought to go, because the world is so hungry today for examples of things that work. Lots of people talk about what doesn't work. It's quite another thing to be able to do something, no matter how small it may seem, that actually changes lives in the direction you think. Second thing I haven't talked much about, but I have been giving a lot of thought to this. Most of us believe that personal freedom, market economics, and political democracy are a pretty good thing. But we need a little more sophisticated analysis of how you manifest that. That is, I always tell people in areas where there's an election for the first time in a long time after bloodshed, that true democracy is more than majority rule. It's also minority rights and the rule of law. But beyond that, I'm struck by how the peculiarities of political systems continually produce governments that will not make decisions that all public opinion polls show are supported in the country. I'll give you a couple of ideas. If you took a poll in Israel and in the Palestinian territories today, you could get big majorities in both places for a peace agreement that nearly everybody would consider honorable and that would be close enough to the one that the King of Saudi Arabia, King Abdullah, got all the Arab Muslim countries in the Middle East, and then eventually, I think, Prince Turkey's here, he could tell me, more than 22 other countries to sign off on, offering a partnership with Israel if they take it. But if you look at how people actually get elected to the Knesset and why, and if you look at the political pressures which you see playing out in Lebanon, you see that sometimes what is maybe a perfectly honest election is put through a democratic form that will not produce a government ever that reflects the majority rule. And that's very frustrating. Now, that brings me to your other question about America. Do I think America is in decline? I don't. But its relative position is changing. Now, you and I used to talk about this when I was in the White House. I used to tell everybody that at the end of the Cold War, we had a brief moment where America was the world's only military, economic, and political superpower. I would remind them that China was bigger than we were, that India was bigger than we were, and that if Europe continued to unite politically and economically, they would be bigger than we were. And you can never begrudge someone else the fruits of their labors or the benefits of their imagination. Therefore, it would not be long before others had aggregate wealth at least as great as we did. And then, whether our military superpower remained unique depended on how they decided to spend their money. And whether our political influence remained unique depended on two things: how they decided to exercise their influence and whether we could remain true to our own values that had made us attractive to people throughout the world. So what I think, David, is that, relatively speaking, the 21st century will belong to a lot of countries, but the world would be much better off if America was still a very important positive force. And we cannot be an important positive force in politics or security affairs unless we have a strong economy. So I don't like the people that have given up on us, because people have been betting against our country for more than 200 years, and so far everybody that's bet against us has lost money because we've had a remarkable ability to keep coming back. On the other hand, I don't like what I see as being set up as one of the main themes that the new Republicans are trying to set up in the 2012 elections, which is they know America is a truly exceptional country and all these wussy Democrats don't. Because, like Michelle Bachmann said in her Tea Party response to President Obama, everybody knows we have the greatest health care system in the world. That is factually untrue. And so that's not true. You can get the best health care in the world in America if you're Bill Clinton or David Gergen or Turkey Faisal, but that's not the same thing as having the best system that works for everybody. So what I think America needs, as much as anything else, is to stop conducting its politics in a parallel universe divorced from reality, with no facts. And I say that, and look, I would make every American here mad, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, if we talked about what I thought ought to be done. I think it's a good thing that a lot of these states with excessive pension burdens are going to be forced to re-examine them. I think it's a terrible thing that state and local governments went around pretending for decades that they were running on balanced budgets when they were doing no such thing. I think that there's a lot of things that conservatives are saying that need to be heard here in the budgeting mechanism. On the other hand, I think the idea of addressing America's deficit problems at a period of no growth by saying we're not going to deal with the defense budget, we're not going to deal with Medicare, we're not going to deal with Medicaid, we have to pay interest on the debt, and therefore we will focus all our cuts on the 15% of the budget that is our pathway to the future is nuts. We need to put our country back in the future business. So my answer to you about America's future is this. You go all the way back to the Sumerian civilization, you'll see that every successful civilization builds institutions that work, that lift it to greatness and lift its talented people up and reward people for their productive efforts. That's what we got to do in Haiti because they don't have those institutions. Then, if you look at every one of those countries or the Roman Empire, you see that at some point all those institutions which benefited people get long in the tooth. They get creaky. They become more, the people running them become more interested in holding on to their relative power than advancing the purpose for which the institution was established. They become, the people who are the constituents become more interested in holding on to present benefits than putting a little of it at risk to build a better future for our children and our grandchildren. That's where we are now, in the public and private sector. That's why there's an opportunity here for genuine bipartisan cooperation in America. We need to modernize America's systems so they fulfill the purpose for which they were established, whether it's government budgeting, the retirement system, the healthcare system, the education system, the way we produce and consume energy, the way we regulate finance and provide credit and investment. And there's more than enough work to go around and more than enough real debates to be had about a slightly right of center or a slightly left of center job. But I think where we are in 50 years depends on what we do now. So I think the inevitability of those who say we're down and out and the inevitability of those who say we're always going to be on top are both wrong. But I'm still with where Winston Churchill was when the British press baited him about America and Roosevelt, his buddy Roosevelt, not coming into World War II. And he said America always does the right thing after exhausting every other alternative. And what I believe is we need to be finished with this alternative exhaustion phase and get the show on the road. And if we do, don't bet against us. We'll come back again.
Bill, I would like to take this point a little bit further. You just mentioned the deficiencies in the democratic election process. Now, the feeling many foreigners have of the United States at this moment is that the society is extremely polarized. And my question to you, and of course it reflects in politics, my question to you is, what could be done to overcome this polarization? Is it something which is of a momentaneous nature, or is it something which, driven by the system, will remain a factum? And what is your recipe?
Well, let's just look at the political season through which we have just come. My party was bound to lose quite a number of seats in the Congress because we picked up some very marginal seats in 2006 and 2008 because of the weakness of the economy and the unpopularity of America's military involvement, principally in Iraq, and because the economy was still bad. On the other hand, we took the whipping we did because there was a very well-organized, well-financed, 2-year effort to drive every alienated person nuts by comparing the president and the leaders of Congress to crypto socialists who were driving the country flat off the brink. And what I mean by a parallel universe is, one more time, the American people rewarded the policies that they say they're against. Since 1981, when the Republican Party departed from traditional conservatism into demonizing the government as an institution and saying the most important thing you can do is to cut taxes and attack government, America's has been dominated by them. We had 8 years and they had 20, 12 on one side of me and 8 on the other until President Obama was elected. Now, during that time, the conservatives produced 20 deficits, quadrupled the debt before I took office and doubled it again when I left, and I produced 4 of my 8 budgets were surpluses, and I paid down $600 billion on the debt. In other words, it's not what it seems, but they had a heck of a campaign. Now, in 1994, I lost the Congress because I took on all this and the National Rifle Association besides on guns, and our party raised a lot of money, but we gave it out to our individual members of Congress because we did not know you could have a national campaign in a non-presidential year. We have known that since 94. In 98, we ran a national campaign and we won. First time since 1822 in the 6th year of our presidency. In 2002, we lost, but President Bush was at 80% after 9/11. We didn't lose much. 2006, we won the Congress back. In 2010, for reasons I will never understand, the Democrats reverted to the strategy of 1994, raised $1.6 billion, and didn't spend even 10% of it to tell the American people what they had done, what they intended to do, and what the differences were. So basically, we had no national message, and they did. It was amplified by Rush Limbaugh, it was amplified by Fox, it was amplified by their paid ads, and I don't blame them. I am not criticizing the Republicans. They're in business to beat us. I'm criticizing my party. We had no national message, so our losses were roughly twice as great as they needed to be, and it's gotten everybody discouraged and thinking of the polarization. Here's what I think is going to happen. There'll be skirmishing. And the conservatives in the Tea Party movement will probably try to force the president and the Democrats to accept basically the obliteration of the future budget of the federal government and our obligations to the world through the AIDS program and other things, or they'll say we won't vote to raise the debt limit. And then one side or the other will blink, or they both will, and then we'll get through that, and then we'll fight some more. And then if we're lucky, it'll be like it was with Newt Gingrich and me and Bob Dole. We'll start working together and do good things for America. But we're going to have to put up with a little blood on the floor and a little uncertainty and a little both sides playing chicken for a while. And I don't really know how it's going to come out. But since I believe that most of these people genuinely love their country, even the ones that totally disagree with me, I have to believe that in the end we'll find a way to work together and to move the country forward. Therefore, I think the president did the right thing in the State of the Union address, not to say some of the things I just said to you, and instead just to be positive and try to keep pushing the ball forward. That's not his job. He did the right thing. I don't know how it's going to come out, but my gut is that a lot of these people that got elected, these new members, they may not have a lot of experience. They may actually believe a lot of what they said that I believe is factually untrue, but they are smart, they are vigorous, they are convicted, and they are energetic, and I think they love their country. So I believe in the end we'll find a way through this. But we have got to stop having these I listened to a zillion debates about health care, and nobody in the press ever said, well, what about the cost of continuing the status quo? We're spending 17.2% of our income on health care, and none of our nearest competitors are closer than 10.5%. Next most expensive system in the world is right here in Switzerland at 11.5%. Because your population is older, and as you see, the reason we're loving Davos is there are certain distributional challenges to bringing health care to remote alpine villages. But if you look at the big countries, you've got Canada at 10.5, Germany at 10, France at 10, the UK at 9.5, Japan at 9. We are spotting our competitors $1 trillion a year, and nobody even talked about it in the last election. So what I want to do is be a nag on both sides and just get people to get back into the fact-based world and then work through their challenges. We'll be fine if we do.
Bill, we are living an age of, let's say, austerity, or we have to live an age of austerity, of deleveraging. On the other hand, you have, if everything is included, I think the real rate of jobless people or job-seeking people is 16-17% in
That's
the
correct.
States. And if you add, let's say, the parents of unemployed people, the relatives, you come to a figure which is probably close to 40% of people directly or indirectly affected by unemployment. So the next election will probably be very much determined by this issue. Now, what would be your advice? To become more protectionist, or what would you do in order to address this issue of unemployment?
Well, let me make a couple of observations. Number one, one of the tragedies of the last election, from my point of view, is that the Democrats and President Obama were blamed for the size of the debt because of the stimulus program, which was a one-off deal brought in because the economy was contracting and there was no private investment. That is, they did what is traditional economic theory. We never had permanent deficits in America before 1981. Just go back and look. We institutionalized deficit spending, and it worked for about 8 years, and then it didn't work very well for President Bush, which is why I won. Because there's only so long you can just keep borrowing money when the economic circumstances don't warrant it. On the other hand, the American people voted against borrowing money when the economic circumstances did warrant it. Now, that doesn't have to be all bad, because unlike the Depression, when we stopped stimulative government spending too soon in 1937, we financed our own deficit then. People like my grandfather, who was a poor working guy, kept a little money in a coffee tin, and when Franklin Roosevelt would come on the radio, he'd get in the tin and go buy a bond and try to help finance. Now we borrowed the money from our trading partners, and we are aggravating the global imbalances and capital flows when we do that. So, on the other hand, look at the challenges Europe is facing. Iceland, not part of the Eurozone, was in worse shape, arguably, than Ireland and Greece, but it seems to be coming back quicker because they weren't subject to a level of contraction that in conventional economic times you would not have. So the Europeans are going to have to figure out how to get money in it. The United States has an interesting dilemma, because the American people have voted now, and they say, we want you to cut back now. We want you to start showing restraint now. The Deficit Commission, the bipartisan commission President Obama appointed, when they issued his report, they recommended we not do this until next year, when growth was underway. So what's the way out of this? And Klaus, you just asked a question. Should we become more protectionist? In general, no. I was glad to see the President say we should adopt the Korean and the Colombian and the Panamanian trade agreements. On the other hand, one of the reasons that the Germans maintained an unemployment rate 2 points below the United States, even when we had recovered a higher percentage of our lost GDP than Germany had. Why did they do that? I think they did it for 3 or 4 reasons. One is Germany did a better job of penetrating the Chinese and other growing markets than we did. 2 is the Germans, partly because of the partnership between management and labor and partly because of the laws, have a much better way of dealing with underemployment than we do. In other words, before you pay somebody the full unemployment, in Germany they have a system where you can get some money from a trust fund you pay into to keep people employed at your firm when activity drops. So you don't have to go to the trouble to hire again and train again and do all that. The third reason is that Germany was one of the 4 countries in the world of the 44 wealthy ones who promised to make specific targets under the Kyoto Climate Change Treaty, the other 3 being the UK, Sweden, and Denmark, and all 4 of them before the financial collapse were outperforming the American economy. They had lower unemployment rates, higher job growth rates, higher business rates, less inequality because they changed the way they produce and consume energy, turned out to be good economics. And so I think that David, is an indication, and Klaus, that for the rich, developed countries, if you want your economy to grow, you don't want to shut it down and become protectionist, but you do have to have a source of new jobs every 5 to 8 years. The other thing I would say is China joined the World Trade Organization. We want them to be able to help the poor people in China who aren't part of their prosperity yet. India, we don't want to see a major political crisis in India where the country has the world's biggest middle class and a record number of millionaires and billionaires and still has 650 million people living on less than $2 a day. So we want them to do that. On the other hand, the relative position of the United States and the other wealthy countries is different now. And we have suffered now. And we have 9.5% unemployment. And if you count the discouraged workers, as Klaus just said, about 16.7% of the working age population. And I do believe that our trade policy has got to reflect that. People can't say, well, you have to be open no matter whether you have any sense of parity in the rules, in the access to markets, in the currency value, and whatever. We have got to recover our own economic strength, or we will not be able to do any good for anybody else. We won't be able to fund the Global Fund on AIDS, TB, and malaria. We won't be able to implement the Millennium Development Goals. So I think you will see, I'd be adamantly opposed to some sort of wholesale protectionism. I don't agree with the immigration position of the new majority in Congress. I think America, including the unemployed and the underemployed, would be more likely to get jobs and more likely to raise their incomes if we passed immigration reform and brought in more skilled immigrants, and we would generate more economic activity. That's what I believe. But I do believe that we have no choice now but to try to focus on the American economy.
Bill, we will have a session, or we are having a session during this meeting with the Prime Ministers of the Scandinavian countries, the Nordic countries, and if you look at our own competitiveness report, the most socially inclusive countries, and also in terms of gender equity, are the most competitive ones.
Absolutely.
And I think this is a lesson which every country should learn. It's inclusive growth, as we say.
It goes back to the point you said that there are no externalities in economics anymore. The most effective political philosophy when it comes to economics is communitarianism. Not necessarily right or left, not necessarily the government has to do this, the private sector has to do that, but a sense that we are all in this together and that we have to create an environment of shared benefits, shared opportunities, shared responsibilities, and common progress. If you have too much inequality, it's going to limit your growth potential. I think you're absolutely right. I don't mind us having an argument in America and throughout the world about what the best way to do that is. But to pretend that the only thing that matters is to keep taxes as low as possible on the private sector and individuals and strangle the government and that'll give you a good result defies all evidence. There is not a single example in the world today of a truly successful economy that does not have Number one, a vigorous private sector. Number two, an effective government. And number three, a strategy to widen the circle of opportunity. There just isn't. You can't find one. So America now has been actually, we permitted, and again, I blame us, my party, more than the other. We had an election conducted on a totally false premise. And you're right. Look at, and the interesting thing on this energy deal is they all did it differently. Germany leapfrogged Japan and the United States to become the number one country in the world in solar power, although China is not going to pass it. But in Germany, the sun shines on average as much as it does in London. So they had to really have big subsidies, and yet Deutsche Bank, not Greenpeace, Deutsche Bank, says that the Germans netted 300,000 jobs out of this solar policy. The Swedes adopted a really sensible, unique carbon tax in 1991 under a conservative government. And David, you ought to talk about this on your television appearances. The Swedes adopted a carbon tax and said, we're going to tax you so you will know the real cost of carbon, so it won't be an externality anymore. And then we're going to give you the money back, 100% of the money. And if you want to spend it just the way you did and maintain just the system we have, you have the freedom to do it. Have at it. And they gave all the money back, and guess what? People wanted to spend the money on something else. So Sweden is the only country to meet its Kyoto targets 100%, virtually 100%, through no alternative energy and all through efficiency. Then Denmark and the UK, they're slightly different stories. But my point is, we have to, you can argue this right or left, but you can't defy the evidence. And so I appreciate what you said. We need the conservative and progressive debate we need should be over what kind of communitarianism we're going to have. How do we have shared benefits? How do we have shared responsibilities? That's the debate the world needs.
Bill, I think that's a good way and a good message to end this session. But nevertheless, I have one last question. You have achieved such a lot during your presidency. You have achieved in a different way a lot over the last 10 years. I think a remarkable example of engagement, global engagement, social engagement. Now, what do you want to achieve the next 10 years?
I'd like to live. I'd like to be a grandfather. I have nothing to do with that achievement, but I would like it. I would like to have a happy wife, and she won't be unless she's a grandmother. Something she wants more than she wanted to be president. Seriously, I tell you what I would like. I consider every day a gift. So I would like to maintain enough health and enough mental capacity to keep learning about the world as it is and keep trying to change it for the better. And before I die, whenever that is, I would like to believe that my own country and the world had at least embraced the right paradigm. No, we're never going to have all the answers, and we're always going to fight like crazy over the details. The best is to be thinking about these things in the right way. That's why I love the World Economic Forum, because you got the primary benefit may be 50 years now of all these Davos meetings may have been by then the millions of conversations that have occurred as people just keep reaching out for each other and reaching out for each other. And I know we're out of time, but just consider this. The Hubble telescope, been up in the air, I don't know, a dozen years or so, believes they may have found the world's first galaxy, 13 billion years old. Last year, we found a planet in another galaxy in the Milky Way that seems to have the same conditions that exist on planet Earth, close enough that there might be life out there. Last year we discovered that unless you are 100% sub-Saharan African, between 1% and 4% of your genome comes from our pre-human ancestors, the Neanderthals. Tells you a lot. My wife was not surprised to find out I was part Neanderthal, but she was stunned to learn that she was. That's the way we all are. It's the thing. Wait. Most important of all, Switzerland is now the home of the largest superconducting supercollider on Earth. It was moved from Texas to Switzerland after the '94 budget. But we still have smaller ones in the United States. The first significant discovery came out of the superconductor last year that may offer a key to how life began after the Big Bang and how we can finally do what Einstein thought might be done and have a unified theory that encompasses biology, chemistry, and physics. Because we were all taught, all of us who studied elemental physics, that at the subatomic level, the positive and negative elements of every atom have to be in equal balance, otherwise matter would not cohere and we would all fly apart. And the superconductor discovered that the smallest subatomic particle, the muon, it turns out that based on their findings, which will be confirmed or contradicted when the Swiss machine is up and going, turns out that there are slightly more positive than negative muons in all of our atoms, which would justify the faith of all the believers of the world, make you more optimistic, and give us an explanation for how we might have all come to this moment from the premortal slime. This is an exciting time to be alive. There's no reason to go around and hang dog. It's just that we don't have a level of consciousness and understanding broadly enough embedded in these societies to make consistently good decisions. And you ask me what I want in the next 10 years? Before I die, I want to believe that is the case so that I can feel that 100 or 1,000 years from now, people on this little planet will wake up with the same sense of wonder I feel every day. That's really what I want.
Thank you so much, President Clinton.
Thank you. Thank you.